Salvete discipuli. Today we're going to be doing some history. We're going to be talking about Caracalla and Geta, who was Caracalla's brother and co-ruler, briefly. And then this other guy who's going to become emperor after Caracalla, a guy named Macrinus. Also going to rule for a very short time, like Geta. So here what we're looking at is it's called a tondo. I believe it's originally from Egypt. It depicts Septimius Severus, his wife Julia Domna, and then two little guys. The one who doesn't have his face ripped out is Caracalla as a boy. And Geta is the one who's missing a face right now, for reasons that we will learn about soon enough. So let's get started. Caracalla's a real interesting character. So let's talk about his early life. So he was one of the sons of Septimius Severus. He was the older one. He was only like a year older than his brother, but Caracalla received a lot more titles more quickly than his brother. He became Caesar first, and eventually he became a full Augustus, co-ruler with his father, whereas his younger brother, Geta, didn't become full Augustus for like 10 years afterwards. So he seemed to be more the favored son of Septimius Severus. So he was son of Severus and the son of Julia Domna, who her family is going to be pretty important towards the end. We're talking about Macrinus and his downfall. Her family is going to play a big part in that. His name, Caracalla, actually is a nickname. It's a lot like Caligula. He was named after a type of military cloak that originated among the Gauls. It's like a Gallic military cloak called a Caracalla, which he wore and popularized. So people started calling him Caracalla. He actually went by Antoninus, and that's what a lot of our sources will call him, Antoninus. But before he was known as Antoninus, he was born Lucius Septimius Bassianus. And basically, at age 7, he got a name change. Because, if you guys recall, Septimius Severus became emperor, but he wasn't chosen emperor by Marcus Aurelius or Commodus. He became emperor because he was the strongest guy. He had the best troops. He came in, he won a couple civil wars, and he was emperor. So he needed a way to make himself more legitimate. And in order to do that, Septimius Severus suddenly came up with this idea and started spreading this rumor. It's basically political propaganda. We might call it fake news today. That before he died, Marcus Aurelius adopted him. So Septimius Severus declared himself the adopted son of Marcus Aurelius. And that made him adopted brother to Commodus. And it was just really a way to make him seem more legitimate. Marcus Aurelius definitely didn't do that. He didn't adopt him. But, the senators know that. People who follow politics might know that. But for the common folks, if you start hearing enough propaganda saying that, you're probably not in the know enough to know any better, and you might just believe it. So it seems like it was generally believed. So, what he did was he also renamed his son Lucius Septimus Bassianus as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. The Marcus Aurelius comes from the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and the Antoninus comes from Marcus Aurelius's adopted father, the Emperor Antoninus Pius, who adopts Marcus Aurelius as his successor. Geta, I don't believe got a name change. I could be wrong about that, but I think Geta just stays Geta. Also, early on in his life, Caracalla is married off to a girl named Plautilla, and she's the daughter of this guy named Plautianus. And Plautianus is a really important figure from the Severan dynasty. He was the Praetorian prefect, and he was a guy who came up in the military ranks with Septimius Severus. Severus trusted him completely, and he gave him a lot of control of the city of Rome while he was off fighting civil wars or one of his military campaigns. So Plautianus becomes very powerful as Praetorian prefect, and he starts to abuse his power, and people keep going to Septimius Severus and saying, hey, Plautianus is doing this stuff, but Severus just wouldn't believe it. So eventually Plautianus does some stuff, and he gets on Caracalla's bad side. And Caracalla really starts pushing his father to get rid of Plautianus. Severus still doesn't want to do that. He still trusts Plautianus. But the thing that really changes Septimius Severus's mind is Septimius Severus has a brother who, on his deathbed, tells Severus that Plautianus is abusing his power. So, basically, there's no reason for his brother to be lying. He's about to die. Why would you just decide to tell a lie about somebody on your deathbed? So, Severus believes him, and he starts to believe Caracalla's what Caracalla's saying about Plautianus, and then not sure whether it happened or didn't, but Caracalla accuses Plautianus of trying to assassinate him, and he has Plautianus executed, and Plautilla, who he's married to but hates, he has exiled. Never again will Caracalla be married, and that causes a lot of rumors, especially because he's very close with his mother, Julia Domna. There are rumors of incest between the two of them. Alright, so starting things off with his reign, we have these imperial brothers, Caracalla and Geta. So in 195, Caracalla becomes Caesar. And as we talked about last time, that causes a civil war because there already was a Caesar, Albinus, in Britain. And Albinus is not happy that he's being replaced. So Severus has to fight a civil war between Albinus, which he wins. And then a couple years later, in 198, Caracalla is officially made co-Augustus. So technically, Caracalla and Severus, his father, have equal power. In reality, Severus is the senior emperor here, and he really holds all the cards. About 11 years later, in 209, Geta is eventually made co-Augustus. So technically, at this point, all three of them are emperors. They all technically have the same level of power. Gaeta and Caracalla are kind of on equal footing, but Severus is definitely the senior emperor. In 211, Severus dies in Britain, and he's going to leave the empire to both Caracalla and Gaeta. And as we mentioned last time, Severus's last words sort of ended, or could be translated as from the Greek, stay united, enrich the army, and spurn all other men. So basically, it's his advice on what they need to do to rule successfully, and he wants them not to fight with each other, wants them to make sure the army is taken care of, because Severus was basically just a military dictator, so he knew you got to keep the army happy. And he says forget about everyone else. And some of this advice Caracalla is going to take. Some of the advice he's going to ignore. Some of the advice that he's going to ignore includes stay united. So the brothers realize they got to get out of Britain quick, because they need to get to Rome so they can officially be declared emperors by the Senate, and then there won't be anyone else trying to claim the title. So they conclude the war with Britain, and they retreat all the way back to Hadrian's Wall. And that's essentially going to be the northern border of Roman Britain for the rest of the empire, really. After this period, no Roman army is going to try to extend Roman influence into what we would now refer to as Scotland. So it sort of sets the border right there at Hadrian's Wall, which really does affect politics on the Isle of Britain for years and years, even after the Romans come out, because that's still the border between England and Scotland. So they make peace, they return south, they go to Rome, but there's some point there on their way back they have a falling out. They were never really happy with each other. I get the impression that Caracalla didn't like sharing power with his brother. He definitely felt that he should be the senior of the two of them, so a lot like his father was the senior emperor. He thought he should be the senior emperor because he was emperor longer. But they have a falling out, and they have the idea that maybe they'll just divide up the empire and each rule their own part. But Julia Domna, their mother, is sort of a peacekeeper, and she keeps them from dividing the empire. Their plan was that Caracalla would get the west, basically Britain, Gaul, Spain, Italy, North Africa around Carthage, and Greece. And then Gaeta would get the eastern portion, so what's modern-day Turkey, Middle East, and Egypt. So they do agree to get rid of that plan, stay united, keep the empire united, but they do divide up the imperial palace in Rome. So basically it's like, I don't know if you ever had like a fight with a sibling that you shared a room with, and you just put like a tape line on the floor and you stay on your side, I'll stay on mine. They do that with the imperial palace. They divide it up between the two of them, and they have everything separate. So they have their own separate guards, they have their own separate servants, cooks, everything. So it's basically like they have two imperial palaces. So this goes on for a little bit until Caracalla, decides to have a meeting. So he goes to his mom and he gets her to arrange a meeting where it's just the three of them in a room. No guards, no nothing. Just Caracalla, Gaeta, Julia Domna. And it's during this meeting that Caracalla pulls out a knife and stabs Gaeta to death right in front of his mother, Julia Domna. And he dies right in her arms. Caracalla declares that Gaeta was trying to assassinate him, and he puts out a damnatio memoriae on Gaeta, which means they erase him from all public records, which is why in the beginning on that picture, that tondo, we saw Gaeta's head erased, because they completely erased all memory of him from any public pictures, statues, written records. Took Gaeta's name out of everything. All right, the second bit of advice, enrich the military, is actually something that Caracalla did follow from what Severus told him to do on his deathbed. So when Severus became emperor, he increased soldier pay to 500 denarii per year. Now, before that, soldiers were receiving about 250 denarii a year. Their pay hadn't been increased for over 100 years. So it was due time to have that pay increase. However, Caracalla, who's coming in, not that long after his father, he increases it again to 750 denarii a year, which is now quite a lot of money. So being a soldier has now become a pretty lucrative career. So it's made him super popular with the army. Soldiers love him. But it's caused quite a bit of financial chaos, because how's the state going to pay all that extra money? So it's like if you increased, how much you have to pay the army by 50%, how are you going to do that financially? That leads to a lot of questions, and Caracalla is going to have to solve these problems as best he can. What he does may not be the best thing for the empire, though. So let's get to his financial policy. His idea is to devalue the coins, which is the go-to idea that Roman emperors are doing, really since the time of Vespasian. If we remember, Vespasian had to devalue some coinage. Titus did. Domitian actually is one of the last emperors who revalues the coins. And even he, towards the end of his reign, has to devalue them a little bit. So in Domitian's reign, about 100 years prior to this, the coins are about 91% silver. By the time you get to Septimius Severus, the end of his reign, the coins are about 55% silver. And Domitian, or no, sorry, not Domitian, Caracalla is going to further devalue them. So he slightly devalues them from 55% to 51% silver. So because of this, people are starting to hoard the older coins, because they're technically worth more money because they have a higher silver content. So they'll say keep denarius from the time of like Domitian or an older coin, because it has a high silver content. But when it comes to doing something like paying taxes, they're going to use newer coins to pay them because they have a lower silver content. Um, so by doing this, that's really going to cause inflation to occur. So one of the other ideas he has is he's going to issue a new type of coin um, called an Antoninianus, named after him, of course, because he went by uh, his name Antoninus. So an Antoninianus is a coin named after him. And this coin theoretically equaled 2 denarii. So it was like 2 denarii equals 1 Antoninianus. So he could give out these Antoninianus coins in pay to the army, say, and they are getting paid a certain amount of money, but the actual silver content of the coins weren't equal to 2 denarii worth of silver. They were equal to 1.5 denarii worth of silver. Um, so really, this caused people to not really want to use these coins because the actual physical silver content was lower than the face value of the coin. So again, they would be using these coins to pay taxes, but they wouldn't necessarily be keeping them to use for trade. So all of this is depleting the treasury of silver and causing inflation to rise within the empire. So all of these financial policies in the short term give him the cash that he can pay the army, but damage the economy in the long run. Now, one of the most important things from the reign of Caracalla is what's called the Constitutio Antoniniana, or we might say in English the Antonine Constitution, or the Edict of Caracalla, or the Edict of Antoninus, all different ways to say that. And it's pretty significant because it made all the people living in the Roman Empire Roman citizens. So before that time, you would really have to be either born in a city that had Roman citizenship, so Rome or one of the cities that has been granted Roman citizenship, or your parents had to be Roman citizens in order for you to become a Roman citizen. Or you could also pay your way in if you were wealthy enough. But what this edict did was it created new citizenship status for all people living within the empire. So if you lived in Gaul and you weren't related to any Roman citizens, you weren't wealthy enough to buy citizenship, you weren't from a town that had Roman citizenship, but you were technically a subject of the Romans, suddenly you are now a Roman citizen, which has a lot of benefits. In particular, you're now protected by Roman law. Now, there's a big question as to why. Why would Antoninus, or Caracalla, as he's also called, why would he do this? Caracalla's official reason, it's actually pretty cool. We have a papyrus from Egypt that's the actual text, or at least most of the text, of the edict. And the official reason given in the edict was it was a thanksgiving to the gods who saved him from being assassinated by evil Geta. So that was Caracalla's official reason. But our big historian from this period, a guy named Cassius Dio, he says that the reason was he wanted more citizens because if you're a citizen of Rome, you have to pay taxes. So Cassius Dio gave it kind of a cynical spin, and that's actually a spin that I find believable and I like. He created more citizens so he could get more taxes so he could pay the army. And he wouldn't have to devalue as many coins. Um, However, it's important to keep in mind that Cassius Dio is somewhat of a biased historian. He is a senator during the reign of Caracalla, and he's not a senator who is within Caracalla's inner circle. So he's actually a pretty biased source against Caracalla. Um, so he's going to tend to take a more cynical stand. So he might not be the most accurate. Might have to take him a little grain of salt. But what are some other possible reasons um, why he could have done this? It also could be that he needed more people to serve in the army. And if you're a Roman citizen, you can serve in the Roman legions. So he wanted to increase the number of citizens eligible to join the army. However, some modern historians have pointed out that it could have had the opposite effect because Roman citizenship was a reward for serving in the auxiliaries of Rome. So it may have decreased the number of people interested in joining the army in the long run. But in the short term, it would increase the number of soldiers eligible to join the army. And he may have just done it to make himself more popular with the people and as like a PR stunt. Because technically, when you make new citizens of the empire, they become citizens and they get a new Roman name. So let's say, for example, you're Diodorus and you live in Greece, and this edict goes into effect and you become a Roman citizen. You keep your name as your third name, and then you get a new uh, praenomen and a new gens name, a new nomen. And that praenomen and nomen come from the person who gave you citizenship. So every person in the empire who was granted citizenship through this edict, their name became Marcus Aurelius, whatever their name was. So if you're this guy Diodorus, our fictional guy living in Greece who just got citizenship, your name went from Diodorus of whatever city, Diodorus of Athens, we'll say. You drop the of Athens, and you're now Marcus Aurelius Diodorus as your new Roman name. So everybody in the empire who got their citizenship status through this edict now was named after Caracalla, whose name, if you recall, is Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. So they're all Marcus Aurelius, whatever their name was. So it's a pretty significant thing, and he really has changed the social structure of the empire for generations and years to come. One thing that he did was he completed what we refer to as the Baths of Caracalla, and it was an enormous bathhouse in Rome. It was used continuously even after the western half of the empire fell. Um, it continued to be used until the 530s AD. It's an enormous bath complex. You can still go to Rome and visit the ruins today. I went there, I guess probably back in 2012. I was there at the Baths of Caracalla. So you can still see some stuff. It was an enormous complex. The statues from the Baths of Caracalla, most of them are now in the Naples Archaeological Museum. In particular, there's a statue of Hercules called the Farnese Hercules. It's in the Naples Archaeological Museum, so it's really awesome. If you're ever in Naples, check it out. All right, so Caracalla leaves Rome in 213. So he becomes emperor in 211, kills his brother not long after, and 213 he leaves the city of Rome. And he's never going to come back. Not by choice, but just so happens he never gets back to the city of Rome because he's going to be assassinated. Spoiler alert. So the first thing he does after he leaves the city of Rome is he goes on a tour of the provinces. He's compared to Hadrian a lot of times because Hadrian was also somebody who didn't stay in Rome very long. He would go walking around the empire and checking out the different provinces, making sure everything's running efficiently. Caracalla did the same thing. He went north first, and he led a campaign against a group of Germans called the Alemanni. So they were a German tribal confederation. Actually, their name kind of left an impression on the Latin language, and Alemanni becomes a term for German people more generally. So they still call them the Germani for the Germans, but they also call them the Alemanni. And that idea stuck with Latin, and eventually, in some of the Romance languages, it will influence the word for German. So in Spanish and French, it influences the word for German. In Spanish, it's Alemania, is Germany. So after he defeats them, he sends word to the Senate. He's granted the title Alemannicus and Germanicus. And there's a guy in the Senate called Helvius Pertinax. He's actually the son of the Emperor Pertinax. And he makes a joke that he should be granted the title, that Caracalla should be granted the title Geticus Maximus, which is a pun because there was a Germanic tribe, one of these tribes associated with the Alemanni called the Getae, who were also defeated by Caracalla. And it also just so happens that Geta, his brother, who was murdered by Caracalla, their names are very similar. So Pertinax makes this joke that he should also be granted the title Geticus Maximus, the killer of Geta. He didn't like that joke too much, but for some reason he let him live, which is surprising for Caracalla, especially considering what he's going to do next. So as he's going around the empire, he makes his way to Egypt and Alexandria, and the people of Alexandria were putting on a play about Caracalla. It was a satire about him killing his brother, which Caracalla was really not too fond of. So he had basically all the young men of Alexandria, or all the young men who were of prominent families in Alexandria, he had them come out of the city into a field for a military inspection, and then he had his soldiers slaughter them. So it was a huge massacre in Alexandria just because they made a joke about him killing his brother. So Caracalla it's always important to remember, not the most mentally stable guy around. All right, so there's also a war with Parthia during Caracalla's reign. It's actually going to be our last war with Parthia. The Romans have been fighting with the Parthians for a few hundred years now. If you recall back during the times of the Triumvirate, um, Crassus fights a war against the Parthians. Julius Caesar's planning to fight a war with the Parthians before he's assassinated. And there's all these various other wars. Marcus Aurelius, most recently, fought the Parthians. So now we're going to have this one more war with the Parthians. It doesn't actually result in a Roman victory, but it's the last war against the Parthians because the Parthians are going to be conquered by another group called the Sassanids or the Sassanians, who are a Persian, sort of reborn Persian empire, to simplify things. All right, so how does this whole Parthian War get started? Well, Vologases V, the king of Parthia, dies. And that causes a big civil war to happen because two of his sons, Vologases VI and Artabanus IV, go to civil war against each other. Vologases is the older brother, so by birthright he should inherit the empire, but Artabanus disputes that. And basically, because they're having a civil war, that kind of destabilizes the region, and it's an opportunity for Caracalla to bring some of the kingdoms that are technically controlled loosely by the Parthian Empire. He brings them into Roman influence. Most especially Armenia is one of the most important ones. And he would also really like to go to war with Parthia because he's really trying to cultivate an image of him being Alexander the Great reborn. So he has to go conquer out east if he's going to be a true Alexander the Great. So he is basically just kind of goading Parthia to declare war against him. So one of the things he does is he demands Tiridates of Armenia, who was king of Armenia, who is a hostage right now in Parthia. He demands that that guy be returned, and also this philosopher named Antiochus. He wants both of them returned, thinking that the Parthians will refuse, and he can use that as a basis for going to war with them. But Artabanus kind of calls his bluff, and he sends the hostages back. So there was no real justification for war. So instead, Caracalla asks for Artabanus's daughter's hand in marriage. Now, Artabanus refuses. So basically, the idea is that Artabanus refuses because he thinks if he accepts, then Caracalla is just going to use that as an excuse to try to annex the Parthian Empire, which he probably would have done. But given the refusal, that is enough for him to declare war. So according to Cassius Dio, who's writing during this time period, that's his reason for declaring war. However, we have another historian, a guy named Herodian, and he gives a different story. he says that Artabanus refuses, but then Caracalla convinces him to agree, and they throw a wedding. And at the wedding, Caracalla gives a signal, and a bunch of Roman troops swarm in and kill everybody, and Artabanus just barely escapes. So it's a real like Game of Thrones style red wedding kind of thing, um, where Caracalla kills everybody. Dio never mentions that, and given the fact that Dio really dislikes Caracalla, if he had done something like this that would kind of look bad on him, we would expect Dio to talk about it. Also, Herodian's not super reliable. He tends to have like a pretty loose interpretation of the truth. He would much rather tell a good story than an accurate story. So most historians don't believe the Herodian account, but it's a great story. So then, because of the refusal, or if you believe Herodian because Caracalla just murdered a bunch of people, there's a war. The Romans and Parthians go to war. Commodus attacks Mesopotamia. The Parthians don't really engage him, but he still declares a victory anyway before he retires to Edessa for the winter, because if you remember, you can't really fight during the winter in the ancient world. So in the winter, they would go into winter quarters and wait things out. So he goes to the city of Edessa to wait things out for the winter. And that's where things go bad for him. So Caracalla is going to be assassinated. If you Google the assassination of Caracalla, you'll get a picture that looks like this, which is by far one of my favorite assassination photos I've ever seen. And I'm thankful that Google exists. So anyway, this assassination started the way all good assassinations start, with a prophecy. So in Rome, there's this prophet, and he sort of gives this prophecy that Caracalla is going to be murdered and succeeded by the current Praetorian prefect Marcus Apellius Macrinus. And he starts just spreading this prophecy around. And somebody, maybe the prophet, maybe a senator, who knows, sends a letter to both Caracalla and Macrinus that Macrinus is going to assassinate him based on this prophecy. So somehow Macrinus gets the letter first, and Caracalla doesn't get the news. And Macrinus realizes that if Caracalla finds out about this prophecy, he's probably just going to murder Macrinus just to make sure it doesn't happen, make sure it doesn't come true. So Macrinus decides the only thing he now can do is kill Caracalla before Caracalla can kill him. So it actually, in essence, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in order to do this, Macrinus enlists a centurion called Justin Martialis, Justinus Martialis in Latin. He's a centurion who doesn't really like Caracalla because Caracalla passed him up for a promotion. So while the army's coming out of winter quarters and they're on the march, Caracalla stops to use the bathroom. And at this point, that's when Martialis comes in and stabs him, hence the picture. Unfortunately for our friend Martialis, Caracalla's bodyguards swarm in and murder him immediately. So he's dead, and Caracalla's dead. And that leaves our friend Macrinus. So Macrinus gets declared emperor by the legions. He was the Praetorian prefect, so he was sort of one of the highest ranking officials there. This is kind of big in terms of who can be emperor, because this is the first time anyone of equestrian rank is made emperor. So previously, you had to be of senatorial rank to be emperor. So it really expands the idea of who can be emperor in Rome. If you recall Rome's class system, you have the senatorial group up at the top, and they're the people who wield political power. Below them are the equestrians, and they're not really supposed to wield a lot of political power. They can be administrators in the empire, and they can govern provinces, but they aren't really, in theory, supposed to get into the highest levels of power. And that's sort of a system that the Emperor Augustus kind of put in place, and is why he would put men of equestrian rank into some powerful posts, because technically they couldn't use that power to become emperor. But this kind of has subverted that idea, and now it's expanding the office of emperor to people of equestrian rank. But really, what does he get? He gets an empire that is completely bankrupt thanks to Caracalla's spending, and it's at war with Parthia, Armenia, and Dacia. So he's got 3 wars and no money. To top things off, as soon as he goes out, he loses a pretty minor battle to the Parthians, but that's enough. He just makes peace with them. And he has to pay a good chunk of money to the Parthians. So technically it's a peace treaty, and he can say it's a win. He came in and got them to agree to peace, but in reality it's a loss. The Romans have to pay money. He returns to Antioch, and that's where Julia Domna is. She's kind of been holding down the fort in Antioch while Caracalla's been in Parthia fighting a war. He puts her under house arrest, and fairly soon she dies. According to the sources, she dies from breast cancer. Macrinus doesn't reign for a long time, but he does do some stuff to help put the empire on more solid footing. He makes peace with Parthia, like we talked about, and then he also makes peace with Dacia and Armenia. He's not a big military emperor. He prefers diplomacy to handle things, probably because he can't really afford to pay for large campaigns. He also changes the policy, so it would cause a revolt if he just lowered the pay of the army. So he keeps the pay at 750 denarii for all the current soldiers, but any new recruits joining the army will join at a lower pay, and that sort of gets the empire on more solid financial footing. So anytime they recruit a new soldier, he's going to get a lower salary. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is these 3 ladies named Julia, and those 3 ladies are going to become instrumental in the ascension of our next 2 emperors. So Julia Domna dies, like we said, and her sister, Julia Maesa, is allowed to leave Antioch and go back home to Emesa with her daughters. Her daughters are also named Julia, Julia Soimias, and Julia Mamaea. So these three Julias don't want to be out of power. Their family has been part of the imperial household because of their relation to Julia Domna, their sister and aunt, respectively. Now, Julia Misa comes up with a plan, and she goes to the 3rd Gallic Legion, which is stationed near Emesa, their home, and basically convinces the Legion that her daughter, Julia Soimias, had a illegitimate son with Caracalla, who would be her cousin Caracalla, and that her son, Varius Avidius Bassianus, was actually Caracalla's illegitimate son, and therefore Varius Avidius Bassianus, would be the true heir to the Roman Empire, because he was the son of Caracalla. Was that true? Probably not. Is it enough to convince the legions? Definitely. So this legion rebels and attacks Antioch. Macrinus is forced to flee to Rome, but on his way he's captured and executed. And that ends the brief reign of our friend Macrinus, and Varius Avidius Bassianus is going to be declared the new emperor, and we actually know him a lot. Or historians tend to call him Elagabalus. And he's going to be another very interesting emperor that we'll be talking about very soon. So I look forward actually to that discussion. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. There's going to be some history questions for you to go over. Have a good spring break, and I will see you probably virtually later.